The cleaning woman was scorned when she tried to touch the expensive piano. However, the moment she played the first few notes, everyone was left speechless in shock. "You missed a spot," the young man said without looking up from his phone. The echo of his voice lingered longer than it should have in the empty recital hall. Ember Miller stilled her cloth, still in hand, halfway through polishing the black lacquered lid of the Steinway. She turned slowly. Jonah Arliston stood across the room in his tailored navy coat, one patent leather loafer balanced on the edge of a velvet chair. His violin case, monogrammed in gold, dangled from his shoulder like a casual afterthought. He was everything the conservatory celebrated, sharp-jawed, pedigreed, confident to the point of cruelty. He pointed at the piano with a manicured finger. "Right there," he said, still not meeting her eyes. Smudge. It was spotless. She'd already wiped that corner twice, but Ember bent forward and ran the cloth across it again, the way she always did, quietly, without answer, without protest. She'd learned long ago that silence could be a shield sharper than words. Jonah made a small sound, something between a scoff and a chuckle before sauntering off toward the hallway. His footsteps echoed down the marble corridor, fading like the last note of a badly played solo. The hall was empty again. Ember exhaled through her nose, a sound she barely noticed anymore. The early morning light pushed through the arched windows above, laying strips of soft gold across the polished floor. Dust motes floated like secrets suspended in air. She leaned back from the piano and took in the way it caught the light, like something sacred, still asleep. The Steinway had been here since 1982. She knew every curve, every creak of its bench. Its low register had a warmth to it, rich, almost grainy, like aged bourbon or a man's voice after a sleepless night. No one else heard it that way. No one else listened long enough to notice. She folded the cloth in even squares, one corner at a time. Then, as if moved by something older than memory, she stepped around the bench and sat. The fabric of her uniform whispered against the cushion. Her back stayed straight, hands in her lap, eyes on the keys. She didn't touch them. Not yet. Instead, she remembered. A bar in Savannah. Cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling. A battered upright in the corner, paint peeling off its frame. She was 7 knees barely clearing the bench, playing with 2 fingers, while the man beside her, Mr. Clarence they called him, nodded, slow and steady. "You hear that, baby girl?" He'd whisper, tapping a rhythm on the wood. "That's life humming through you." She'd laughed then, small and open. But the sound of her mother's cough from the kitchen had always brought her back down. The music stopped. Not long after rent came first. Medicine came second. School disappeared and dreams folded like laundry into drawers that were never opened again. But now, in the quiet glow of this sacred hall, Ember let her fingers hover above the keys. They curved naturally, instinctively, like muscle memory had outlived every dream she'd buried. One breath, then another. And then she pressed middle C. It rang clear, unassuming, and terribly alive. The silence after it felt fuller than sound. "That's a fine note," came a voice from the doorway. She jumped, nearly losing her balance. A man in a navy uniform leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. His badge caught a glint of morning light. Joseph Langley, campus security. "Didn't mean to startle you," he added quickly. Hands raised. Ember stood smoothing the front of her gray tunic. I wasn't playing, just sitting at a piano and pressing keys." His smile was gentle, not mocking. "I'm staff," she said. The words came out flat, as if that should explain everything. Joseph tilted his head. "So pianos don't know uniforms. They only know hands." She looked at her own. Calloused dry from polish and soap, but still shaped like they remembered. He stepped closer. "Play something I can't." "You can't." His eyes didn't blink. "Or you won't." She hesitated. "I never had training." "Not really," she admitted. "I don't belong here." Joseph gestured toward the grand room, toward the banners that still hung from last spring's concert. "Funny thing about belonging, it's rarely about invitation. Usually, it's about courage. She stared at him. There's a wild card slot in this year's Whitmore competition, he said. One audition, open to anyone. Doesn't matter your age, your title, your resume, just how you play. Ember laughed, sharp and bitter. You think they'll let someone like me? What kind of someone are you? He asked, interrupting gently. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Joseph held her gaze for one long beat. Then he looked at his watch. Sign-ups close tomorrow morning. He left with no parting word, just a nod. When the door eased shut behind him, Ember stood alone beside the Steinway. Her hands rested on the piano's lid. It was warm under her palm. Her cloth lay forgotten on the bench. 2 hours later, the train platform smelled faintly of metal and wet concrete, like rain had passed through hours ago and left only its ghost behind. Ember sat in the last car, one leg crossed tightly over the other, her canvas bag folded against her ribs. The train lurched, humming underfoot. A corner of an old flyer peeked from the bag's front pocket, a square of glossy cardstock she hadn't meant to take, but hadn't returned either. She unfolded it with one hand. The words shimmered faintly under the flickering light. Whitmore. Invitational. Discover the next great virtuoso. One wild card. One open seat. One chance. Below it, a lineup of polished faces stared out young, confident teeth. Too perfect. They looked like they'd been born at a piano bench, not beside a mop bucket. The train hissed as it slowed. Dorchester Station. Ember stood bracing herself against the rail, then stepped into the wind. The walk home was short, familiar brick buildings with ivy clinging like regret mailboxes with rusted locks, laundry lines sagging under damp cotton. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. Inside her apartment, the air held a faint chill. One burner clicked as she twisted the knob, then sparked to life. She didn't bother with dinner, just water, just quiet. The piano sat near the window, a second-hand upright she'd rescued from a Baptist church 3 winters ago. 2 keys stuck when humidity swelled the wood, and the left pedal creaked like an old man's knee, but it still sang in its own way. She sat without ceremony. The bench wobbled slightly under her weight. Her fingers hovered, then pressed. 3 notes, then 5. Then a phrase, half remembered, half invented, crawling out of her like something long kept in the dark. It wasn't a song, not in any formal sense. It had no key, no sheet music, no title, but it moved low, winding unpolished. It carried the ache of a bus stop winter, the hush of a mother's hospital room. The laugh she used to have before silence taught her better. Her hand stilled mid-air. The sound hung for a breath, then faded. The flyer was still on the table. She reached for it. Tomorrow. By 9. A sound behind her made her freeze. It was nothing. Just the radiator groaning as it always did when the pipes woke up. Still, she folded the flyer and slipped it into the drawer beside her bills and the unused takeout menu from a place she'd never tried. She didn't sleep much. Her dreams, when they came, were scattered. A room full of judges with turned backs, a piano that shattered under her fingers, her mother's voice calling her name from behind a locked door. At 8:45 the next morning, Ember stood just inside the east hallway of the conservatory. She hadn't intended to come. Not really. She'd worn her uniform on purpose. The gray cotton jacket, the plain slacks, the soft-soled shoes. She even brought her rag cart parked 2 doors down under the emergency light. If anyone asked, she could always say she was just checking supplies. But she wasn't near the janitor's closet. She was near the audition room. Students walked past in clusters. Young women in black skirts. Young men in pressed button-downs. Hair-slicked portfolios clasped tightly to their chests. One girl laughed too loudly, her nerves slipping out between syllables. Another boy leaned against the wall and practiced fingering on his thigh. None of them noticed Ember. That part hadn't changed. Then Joseph appeared like a shadow in reverse. Steady, unhurried, a folded form in his hand, as if it had waited with him all along. He didn't smile, just said, I've seen a lot of people play in this building. Most follow the rules, but only a few ever make the room feel like it's listening back. Ember didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the floor, where the shine of fresh wax caught the morning light. He stepped closer, not intruding, just there. You don't need sheet music to prove you have something to say, and you don't need permission to be heard. She exhaled barely. I wear this uniform for a reason, she said, her voice rough. People see what they want and stop there. Joseph held out the form gently like it might break. Then maybe it's time they see what they've missed. She looked at it for a long moment, then reached out slow but certain. She took the form. There was no fanfare, no angels singing, just the sound of her pen scratching her name onto the last line, Ember Miller. Under piece to be performed, she hesitated, then wrote, Original composition. The woman at the registration table raised one brow but said nothing, just nodded. You'll be the last slot, she said. Ember stepped back. She could feel the eyes now, curious, cautious, some amused. A girl in pearls whispered behind a palm. A boy in a silk vest smirked, then leaned over and said, Just loud enough. Think she's lost, another voice replied. Or maybe cleaning the piano's part of the audition now. Ember didn't flinch. She turned and looked at the hall. She'd cleaned it 100 times, but today she'd play in it. The audition hall smelled of polished wood and old anticipation. Ember stood in the corridor outside the stage door, her name now inked onto a list that had never been meant for someone like her. Inside, music rose and fell like a tide. Czerny, Debussy, a clipped Mozart run. Everything so precise, it felt like it had been rehearsed in a vacuum. Ember sat in the row of chairs near the wall, her gray jacket stiff against her back. She didn't belong here, not by pedigree, not by invitation, only by truth. Walker, a voice called sharp, female and bored. She rose on instinct before realizing the mistake. Oh, the woman at the door blinked, scanning her clipboard again. Miller. Ember. Miller. You're next. No smile, no gesture, just the barest tilt of her head toward the stage. The moment Ember stepped through the heavy door, it shut behind her like a vault. The lights made it hard to see the audience clearly. A long table stood center-elevated slightly, behind which sat 3 judges. In the middle was Celeste Harris, silver hair, twisted tight shoulders, square pen poised as if ready to carve or bless. Miss Miller, she said without warmth, you're performing an original composition. Yes, Ember answered, voice quiet but steady. I see. A pause as Celeste conferred with the woman to her left, then added, Unfortunately, the primary Steinway is undergoing minor adjustments, but we have another instrument you may use. She gestured not toward the grand piano that gleamed under its halo of stage lights, but toward the far corner where a battered upright waited in half shadow. It was old, its varnish dulled one leg, propped with a wedge of paper beneath it. The room shifted. A few scattered chuckles floated from the back rows. Ember caught one from the boy in the silk vest. Celeste offered a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. It may not be ideal, but artistry we believe thrives under constraint. Ember didn't move. Her fingers itched with memory, not outrage. She looked at the piano, not as an insult, but as a test, maybe even an invitation. I'll play on that, she said. She walked across the stage with the steady pace of someone who had once swept these boards in silence. The upright greeted her like an old friend, flawed but familiar. She ran her hand over the keys. A few were chipped. The middle octave dipped slightly left. Still it had a voice. She sat. The bench creaked. She closed her eyes. For a moment the hall vanished. In its place, a smoky room. Her mother humming off-key, the taste of church lemonade. The distant ring of laughter that always stopped just short of her. She played one note, then another. No rush, no apology. The melody emerged like something being remembered more than composed, low and raw, bending between jazz and gospel, straying from precision, but not from purpose. each chord pulled from somewhere old, someplace behind the ribs. There were snickers at first, shifting chairs, but they fell away one by one as the music kept rising. She didn't look at the judges. She didn't need to. This wasn't for them. This was for every quiet corner she'd ever occupied, for every key she'd wiped but never touched. She let the final chord fade like breath into silence. Then Celeste stood. Her heels tapped across the floor like punctuation marks. "Interesting interpretation," she said lightly, moving toward the piano. "Perhaps, to offer context, we might hear what this instrument is capable of, technically speaking." She sat without invitation. Ember stood, stepping aside without a word. Celeste adjusted the bench, rolled her sleeves, and began Chopin Nocturne in C-sharp, minor polished, precise, surgically clean. Each note fell in line like soldiers. The old piano strained under her touch keys, resisting the weight of years. Celeste fought it, controlled. It coaxed beauty through force. When she finished, the applause was minimal. Polite one person coughed. Celeste rose smoothly. "Thank you, Miss Miller," she said, as if sealing a file shut. But Ember didn't leave. "May I continue?" she asked, voice calm. Celeste's brows lifted. "You wish to play again? I haven't finished." There was a pause, then Celeste stepped aside. Ember sat once more. Her hands didn't tremble. She began again, this time, not careful, not cautious. The music came with urgency surging through the battered strings and uneven pedals. A melody unraveled into syncopation, into ache, into release. No one laughed now. The judges didn't take notes. The boy in the vest had his mouth slightly open, his cufflink half turned, and when the final note landed soft and imperfect, the room was silent. Then slowly it rose, a single clap. Then another, then more. It wasn't thunderous. It was reverent, like something rare had just passed through. Ember stood her hands at her sides, still tingling. She had no ribbon, no accolades. Just a name freshly written on a list that no longer seemed so out of reach. The conservatory halls were quieter than usual that afternoon, though it wasn't the quiet of routine. It was the hush that followed, disruption, the kind that lingered in the corners, gathering in glances and unspoken questions. Ember didn't return to the janitor's closet right away. She walked the long corridor, past the portraits of former prodigies, past glass cases lined with awards and gold-lettered plaques. Her shoes squeaked faintly on the tile, same as always, but the sound landed differently now, like something being heard instead of ignored. A slip of folded paper crackled in her pocket. Her audition receipt creased twice. The ink slightly smudged where her fingers had pressed too hard. She had barely made it out the front entrance before she heard footsteps behind her. "You shook the foundation in there," Joseph said. He fell into step beside her coat, unzipped badge swinging slightly with his stride. She didn't look at him yet. "I didn't mean to." "That's the best part. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You just played. And they listened." She paused at the bottom of the stone steps. Her breath rose in the early spring air, thin wisps that faded fast. She turned to him slowly. They clapped. He smiled. They stood. She didn't reply, but a strange warmth unfurled beneath her ribs, part disbelief, part defiance. It felt like the first full breath after years of shallow ones. That evening, Ember sat by the radiator with a mug of weak tea. The piano in the corner seemed more alive than usual, as if it remembered what she'd done with its distant cousin earlier that day. Her email inbox blinked with unread messages, a local music blog requesting an interview, a conservatory administrator asking to connect briefly about an exciting opportunity, a link from Joseph with no subject line, just a video grainy and shaky labeled Wildcard Audition, Ember Miller. She clicked. The video began in shadow, but her figure came into view, the battered upright, her gray sleeves. The first hesitant notes, a faint snicker in the background. Then the room changed. The sound took on shape. People stilled. And when she reached the final chord, a voice from the back whispered, "My God." She closed the laptop. The room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. 2 days later, Ember returned to the conservatory, not through the staff entrance, but through the front, where the floors gleamed with a shine she'd once been responsible for. Students were still abuzz. Her name passed in soft murmurs, some curious, some cautious, some skeptical. The boy in the vest avoided her gaze. A knock on the office door broke her drift. "Come in," said a familiar voice. Celeste Harris sat at her desk, sharp, elegant, still unreadable, but something in her posture had shifted, less guarded, less poised for war. "I didn't expect to see you today," Celeste said, standing, "though I suppose I should have." Ember nodded once, unsure of what to say. Celeste motioned to the chair across from her. "Sit." The room smelled faintly of paper and lavender polish. Behind Celeste, a bookshelf lined with music. Theory, biographies, and concert programs formed a quiet, watchful wall. "You surprised me," Celeste said. Her tone was measured, not because I doubted your potential, but because I had assumed your kind of playing didn't survive in places like this. Ember's fingers curled around the strap of her bag. "I've been wrong before," Celeste continued, "but rarely this meaningfully." A pause passed between them, heavy, but not uncomfortable. "I want to help you shape that voice of yours," Celeste said. "Not to change it, not to polish the edges off, but to make sure you can hold your own when the lights are brighter and the audience less kind." Ember studied her. "Why? Because the truth doesn't often get a second chance to be heard," Celeste replied. "And when it does, it needs someone strong enough to carry it." That night, another email arrived. The subject line read, "Congratulations. Artist residency. Offer. Boston Conservatory." Ember read it twice, then once more out loud as if the words might vanish if she didn't speak them. They hadn't offered her a scholarship or a pat on the back. They were offering her a place, a title. She let the screen go dark, the reflection of her own face blinking back at her in the glass. The woman who once carried ammonia and cloth now carried melody and memory. In the drawer beside her bed was the crumpled flyer from the Whitmore competition, the same one that had landed in her mailbox weeks ago. She smoothed it gently, thumb tracing the words, "Discover the next great virtuoso." Some doors are built to keep people out. Others just need the right key. The practice room smelled faintly of lemon oil and varnish, sharp and clean like expectation. The upright piano stood waiting in the corner, its surface freshly dusted, keys slightly yellowed with time. Ember sat across from Celeste, back straight, fingers resting on her lap like folded truths. "Again," Celeste said, tapping a soft beat against her thigh. Not louder, fuller. Ember nodded once. She returned to the keyboard, letting her hands settle without rush. Her shoulders drew back with quiet resolve. The notes came slowly this time, deliberate and steady. Less like performance, more like conversation. Celeste didn't smile, but she closed her eyes briefly, listening with that sharp stillness she used instead of praise. "You pull from places most people avoid," Celeste murmured. "That's your strength. But it can also betray you if you let it drift." Ember paused mid-phrase. "You mean it's too raw? I mean it's unguarded," Celeste said. "And unguarded things are often misunderstood." They worked through the afternoon phrasing, tempo transitions. Celeste didn't coddle. She corrected without cruelty, tested Ember's instincts against the structure of formality, but she never asked her to tame the piece, only to ground it between repetitions. Ember stretched her wrists and reached for her thermos. "You mentioned once, your sister played jazz." Celeste's gaze moved to the window. She did, with more fire than form. The academy called it unfocused. They asked her to choose discipline or distance. She chose distance. She gave it up. No, the world gave her up first. Ember looked down at the keys. "Did you ever play with her?" Celeste smiled, faint and rare. Once. We didn't speak for 6 years, after silence settled in again. Not awkward, but honest. Later that week, the rehearsal space shifted from quiet to crowded. The first full run-through faculty lined the back row. Contestants filed in, clutching sheet music and nerves. Ember stood near the wing, her palms warm, not from fear this time, but readiness. She wore black slacks and a pressed blouse Joseph had found for her, a far cry from the gray uniform, but still simple, still hers. A whisper passed behind her. That's the wild card woman. She doesn't even have formal training. She just plays. Feelings. She let it pass. She'd lived with worse when her name was called. She stepped forward. The room didn't hush, but it watched. She sat at the Steinway, polished perfect foreign in its luxury. Her hands found their place, and she began. The room didn't shift right away, but somewhere in the third bar it breathed differently. Her melody wasn't clean in the academic sense. It bent, it leaned, it swayed against tradition, but it told the truth, and that was rarer than precision. When she finished, no one clapped. This wasn't a performance, it was proof. Celeste nodded once from the back, not in approval, but in recognition. By evening, Ember's phone buzzed nonstop. The video Joseph had recorded weeks earlier was making rounds online. A caption floated above the footage like a quiet anthem. She played what the rest of us are too afraid to say. 500,000 views. Messages trickled in from strangers, from mothers, from retired musicians who hadn't touched a key in years. Ember didn't respond to them all, but she read each one. And when she returned to the small piano in her apartment that night, she didn't start from memory. She started from silence, then wrote each note down real, this time. The recital hall stood empty when Ember arrived. The air inside was still and watchful, like a room holding its breath. Morning light filtered through the high windows in slanted stripes, catching flecks of dust suspended like quiet questions. She moved toward the stage with careful steps, shoes tapping softly against the polished floor, the sound echoing faintly into the open ceiling. She didn't go to the main Steinway, not yet. Instead, she sat at the older upright tucked near the wall, the one from her first audition, the one whose keys had once carried the weight of her first real risk. She let her fingers brush the ivory, not to play but to remember what courage had sounded like that day. Out in the lobby, the buzz had already begun. Staff darted between doors. Programs were being stacked. A clipboard clicked. Someone laughed nervously. But in this moment, surrounded by silence, Ember felt none of that. What filled her was quieter, heavier. Not doubt exactly, but something knotted deeper. Her score sat folded neatly in her canvas bag backstage, the final version she'd penned days ago. She had read it a dozen times last night just to feel the security of it in her hands. It was her map, her anchor. Or so she thought. A tap on the shoulder pulled her back. Miss Miller. A young man in a black crew shirt headset tilted crookedly across his jaw, stood by the edge of the stage. He looked nervous. "There's been a mix-up," he said, words tumbling out. "The folder with your sheet music. Someone moved it or misplaced it. We're still looking, but it might not have been an accident." Ember rose slowly. "What do you mean?" "I think." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "One of the other competitors may have. Well, they were near your case. And now we can't find it. The music. I'm sorry." Her chest-hollowed breath caught between disbelief and something colder. She walked fast but steady back to the green room. Her bag sat where she left it unzipped. The papers inside were jumbled. Her rehearsal notes were scattered, but the final version of her score hand-notated and carefully aligned with the official submission guidelines was gone. Across the room, Preston stood alone, polishing his cufflinks. She stared at him. He looked up briefly and offered a bland smile, just tight enough to feel like a dare. Celeste entered, just as Ember turned away. "I heard Celeste said, and unless you have a second copy digitized or otherwise, this will present a challenge." Ember didn't answer. Celeste walked to the center of the room, voice low but firm. You understand? Ember performing without a submitted score is highly irregular. The judges may see it as an error in preparation, and at this level, errors are rarely forgiven. A long silence stretched between them. Then finally, Ember spoke. Then I'll play without it. Celeste's expression didn't change. You'll be improvising your final... No, Ember said quietly. I'll be remembering it. The hallway outside the stage doors was lined with quiet chaos. Students adjusting dresses, tuning strings, whispering prayers under their breath. Joseph found her standing alone near the exit sign, hands clenched in the pockets of her coat. He held out 2 paper cups, their lids steaming faintly, but when he saw her face, he set them on the radiator instead. Tell me what happened. It's gone, she said. The score. They took it. Joseph's brow furrowed. You know who? She shook her head. Doesn't matter. He studied her, then said slowly, You've played that piece 100 times. Not like this. Not on that stage. Not today. He reached out gently, placing a hand on her arm. You don't need the paper. You wrote it from memory. From truth. It's already in you. She swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening. Ember. He said, his voice quieter. Now you're not walking in there to prove something. You're walking in there to speak. And what you've lived, what you carry, doesn't need ink to be real. When they called her name, she walked onto the stage with neither script nor score, just the weight of silence and her own breath. The lights above were hot and blinding, but she kept her gaze forward. Her dress was plain charcoal gray with a square neckline, the same one she'd worn to her residency interview. There were no sequins, no shine, but it was hers. She sat, adjusted the bench, placed her hands lightly on the keys, and for a moment everything disappeared. The judges, the crowd, the quiet tension stretching from row to row. Even the whisper in her mind that reminded her she was underprepared, out of place. She pressed a single note, then another. The melody didn't come all at once. It trickled cautious like a creek beginning to thaw. But with each measure it grew fuller, warmer. She remembered her mother's humming in the kitchen, the soft scrape of her shoes across the floor after long shifts. She remembered her own hands scrubbing those very steps, humming half melodies just to pass the time. And then she stopped remembering. She started creating. The composition lifted beyond memory into something new. Each passage rose, not just from practice, but from presence. Her rhythm shifted, hands leaping without warning, then pausing to linger on a tender chord. The crowd didn't stir, even the judges. Celeste included leaned forward, not to critique, but to listen. Ember let the final note fade until it barely existed. She didn't bow. She simply looked up, eyes wide and steady, the quiet wrapping around her like a second skin. For a moment, no one moved. The air held something sacred. Then a single clap cracked the stillness. Then another. Then all at once, thunder. In this moment, Ember felt how meaningfully she was alive. Backstage shimmered with the noise of celebration applause still trailing down the hallway, heels clicking on tile camera shutters snapping in bursts. Ember stood motionless in the middle of it, the gold of the stage lights still clinging faintly to her skin. Her breath felt suspended, like she hadn't fully returned to her body yet. Someone touched her shoulder gently, then firmly. Celeste. You rewrote the rules tonight, she said. Her voice was low but sure. Thank you for breaking them. It wasn't praise exactly. It was permission. Ember nodded, a quiet gesture that said more than she could voice. She understood what it meant to earn a word from someone who didn't offer them freely. The award ceremony unfolded in warm light. The hall glowed amber shadows, long and soft. When Celeste stepped to the podium, her tone shifted, less professor, more witness. Tonight, she said, the grand prize belongs not to a prodigy, not to a name we've long known, but to a woman who came without credentials, without a page of music. She came only with soul. Ember. heard her name. A pause. Then thunderous applause. She stepped forward, dress simple hands steady at her sides. The trophy felt heavier than it looked. From the audience, Joseph stood near the back, clapping slowly, tears edging his lashes. When their eyes met, Ember didn't cry, but her fingers trembled, not from nerves but from something much older. Joy. Later came the offers. Interviews, features, speaking requests. Contracts slid across polished tables, but Ember took her time. She said no more than she said yes. What she wanted wasn't fame. It was clarity. She chose spaces where truth could echo, where another quiet girl might be sitting waiting to be told her voice mattered. One evening, she returned home alone. The apartment hadn't changed, the same lamp by the window, the same creak in the floorboard by the kitchen. She sat at her old piano, her hands hovered. Then slowly she began to write the piece she had performed from memory, line by line, not for acclaim, but so that her truth could live on in ink. Outside Boston exhaled its cold spring air. Inside, a woman who once scrubbed floors now composed music at a table she had paid for herself. And this time she wrote it not to be heard, but to endure. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way. It was permission. Ember nodded, a quiet gesture that said more than she could voice. She understood what it meant to earn a word from someone who didn't offer them freely. The award ceremony unfolded in warm light. The hall glowed amber shadows, long and soft. When Celeste stepped to the podium, her tone shifted less. Professor, more witness. Tonight, she said, the grand prize belongs not to a prodigy, not to a name we've long known, but to a woman who came without credentials, without a page of music. She came only with soul. Ember heard her name. A pause. Then thunderous applause. She stepped forward, dress, simple hands steady at her sides. The trophy felt heavier than it looked. From the audience, Joseph stood near the back, clapping slowly, tears edging his lashes. When their eyes met, Ember didn't cry, but her fingers trembled, not from nerves but from something much older. Joy. Later came the offers. Interviews, features, speaking requests, contracts slid across polished tables. But Ember took her time. She said no more than she said yes. What she wanted wasn't fame, it was clarity. She chose spaces where truth could echo, where another quiet girl might be sitting waiting to be told her voice mattered. One evening, she returned home alone. The apartment hadn't changed, the same lamp by the window, the same creak in the floorboard by the kitchen. She sat at her old piano. Her hands hovered. Then slowly she began to write the piece she had performed from memory, line by line. Not for acclaim, but so that her truth could live on in ink. Outside Boston exhaled its cold spring air. Inside, a woman who once scrubbed floors now composed music at a table she had paid for herself. And this time she wrote it not to be heard, but to endure. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel.